Superstar trades are a staple of the NBA, and being a fan of the NBA, it's arguably the best thing that the league does is rumors and trades and constantly having to think about what roster construction is going to look like and always having something in the news. It's arguably the best thing about the league as a whole. However, I think there's a real possibility that those kinds of things could be coming to an end pretty soon. Now, when I say superstar trades, I'm talking about like the top tier. I'm talking about like, James Harden when he got traded from Houston to Brooklyn. I'm talking about like the possibility of a Joel Embiid trade and trade requests, or, Giannis potentially asking out. I'm talking about like that level player, like, top 10, top 12 level players in the league getting traded. And like I said, that's something that I love about the league. I think it's one of the reasons why content creation within the NBA is like a much bigger deal than it is in a lot of other sports leagues, because it's a massive part of the league as a whole. It's something that the league itself is prioritized because they want people to be talking about the NBA 365 days a year. And I'd say for the most part, they've accomplished that goal. And I'm not of the opinion that it's a bad thing. There are people out there that think that player movement and trade demand / requests are a negative thing for the league as a whole. I don't think that's the case. I think it's responsible for a tremendous amount of growth in the casual fan base over the last decade or so, because it's been something that is just constantly interesting rather than actually having to pay attention to the games, which you may or may not think is a good thing, but it at least drives interest in the league, which ultimately is a good thing for the league. However, with the way that the landscape is going to be changing over the next couple of seasons in the NBA, with the way that I'm going to anticipate them potentially changing the rules, and with kind of a shift in mindset in terms of how teams are viewing these star and superstar trades, I wouldn't be surprised if things start to look much different over the next couple of seasons. Now, there's a couple of different kind of avenues and angles to this. First and foremost, spending in the NBA is going to look much different over the next couple of seasons. We've talked about this throughout the entirety of the offseason, but this new, second apron that's been introduced, this, upper level line that once you exceed it in terms of payroll really restricts your ability to put together a competitive roster beyond that. Once you get to that line, it is something that teams are going to constantly have to deal with, think about, and contend with. And I think not only is going to force teams to spread talent more throughout the league, but I think that's the intended goal of that, system being in place, is for teams to have to pick, 1 to 2 star guys and then fill out the rest of their roster. That's something that teams are going to have to take really seriously, not just in terms of who are we paying and who are we not paying, but in terms of bringing in another guy, a third guy, a fourth player to potentially add to your team and pay a ton of money to. Like what we saw in Brooklyn a few years ago with KD, Kyrie, and James Harden, we might never see that again in terms of 3 guys getting paid that much money. It certainly wouldn't be from trading, assets in exchange for that guy just to restrict your ability to put together a roster. It would have to be a situation like in Denver, where they've got a handful of really highly paid players, and all of which are guys that they drafted. And again, I don't necessarily think that overall is a bad thing. It's going to cause a shift in how these kinds of things work, where star and superstar trades and trade requests and trade demands are going to be restricted a little bit. Like the idea of someone underneath that like top 10 level requesting a trade and potentially that being granted, I think is going to become less and less likely. And the trade demand, trade request situation is going to be reserved for those top 10 guys that unquestionably you're willing to give up a ton for, that unquestionably you're willing to spend a lot of money on, and kind of use one of those top 2 player slots within your payroll on those guys. Some of those guys beyond that, kind of in like that Bradley Beal area, those kinds of guys might not be seen as nearly as valuable. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of a shift in what teams view as valuable as well. Not only as they think about what the second apron looks like and how that's going to impact team building, but just a little bit of a correction, because from like 2014 to 2019, teams went kind of crazy in terms of what they were willing to trade in exchange for these star players. I mean, we went from a scenario where Kawhi Leonard in, 2018? Kawhi Leonard in 2018 got traded for DeMar DeRozan, good player, Jakob Poeltl, fine player, and a first round pick. And within like a month or two, a handful of months, all of a sudden we're getting all these superstar trades, all this player movement in that summer and that offseason. And all of a sudden now we're looking at picks and pick swaps and all these different things. And there's just been a wide variety of what a superstar trade looks like. And I think we're starting to shift back maybe a little bit more towards things that look a bit more normal, where I'm going to trade you everything in exchange for that star, kind of like what Phoenix did with KD. To me, I think we're going to start seeing less and less of that, because teams realize they might not have to trade all of that in exchange for those guys. Now, to be clear, the superstar star trade thing, like that's always going to be a part of the NBA. Like I said, it's been an intentional thing. It's been woven into the fabric of the league, and it's never going to stop. But I think the way that it looks is potentially going to be different. I think we're going to start to see teams push back a little bit on some of these trade requests and these trade demands and saying, okay, well, you might not get exactly what you want here. I think we saw it a little bit with KD in Brooklyn when he walked back his trade request the first time. And then, of course, in Portland with Damian Lillard. Now, those guys are older and had longer contracts and things like that. You didn't have the risk of potentially losing them in free agency the way that we used to when guys would demand trades. But I think teams are going to start to push back a little bit on this. And it's not just going to be you get to do whatever you want when you're kind of a star player. And I think it's pretty easy to argue that if we do start to change some things a little bit here, and it does start to be either less common or handled in a different way in terms of these trades and superstar trades, that there is a balance that we can strike here between what I believe, which is that it's really healthy for the league just because it gets people more interested in the league, and people that kind of hate it because it changes what fandom looks like in the league, whereas, you know, most people now just care about players rather than teams. I think it's possible that over the next couple of years we meet like a nice kind of middle ground where there's enough of these kinds of rumors and star trades that there's still a lot of interest in the league. We're still bringing new people into the NBA while also maybe not just allowing every semi-star in the league to demand a trade to their specific destination with a handful of years left on their contract. I do think that is the biggest potential, the biggest flaw in all of this. If you're looking at what's the biggest reason why star-superstar trades are an issue for the league, it's this new kind of trend of it doesn't matter how many years I have left on my deal, I'm going to request a trade and you're going to listen to me. Because it used to be you would have 18 months to a year left on your contract, and that threat of potentially leaving free agency, leaving for nothing, was what forced the team to trade you away in the first place. And now that we moved into more of this, like, no, you have to trade me because I'm the star and I'm supposed to get what I want, that is something that I think is dangerous. And all these things come together in a way I think that is hopefully going to change the league in a positive way. They've kind of just let things happen and let stars do kind of what they want over the last handful of seasons. But at some point, the owners are going to say, hey, we want a little bit more, control over what's happening here. And front offices are going to say, hey, we definitely want more control over what's happening in terms of these trades and trade demands and things like that. And I think there's going to be a correction. I think there's going to be less of these. There might be the same amount of demands, but I think there's going to be less overall craziness in terms of star and superstar trades. And then we might go back a little bit more to what the league used to look like in terms of player movement, and that's free agency. Whereas it went from guys leaving as free agents to now everybody requesting a trade. There's just going to be some changes. This stuff is going to look different, I think, within the new CBA, within having the new second apron out there in terms of how that's going to impact roster construction in terms of payroll and just overall pushback from front offices and ownership groups. And ultimately, I think it's pretty easy to argue that even as much as I love all the crazy rumors and it's great for content, that a little bit more of a shift to how things used to be could very easily be healthy for the NBA.